Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me today are our two regular viewmeisters, as Bill O'Brien used to call our panelists way back in the day. Joining us on my right is Regina Nelson. Regina is a professor in early childhood education in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies at Western Michigan University. Is that right?
Yes.
Did I get it right? It's always a mouthful to get your department in there. And also is one of our regulars, Don Cooney. Don is a professor over in the School of Social Work at WMU. And you have a second job, right? You moonlight somewhere, right?
Yes.
City Commissioner and the City of Kalamazoo. Well, what we want to focus on today are the recent Supreme Court rulings. The recent term of the Supreme Court, the 21-22 term, was, I think by all accounts from the view of progressives, a disastrous term, catastrophic term in many ways, given the recent rulings, particularly rulings on abortion, gun control, environmental protection, and the separation of church and state. Now, I don't know if we'll get to all of those issues today, and we'd also kind of like to try to figure out why the court or how the court has been able to do what it's doing here. Elie Mystal, who is a lawyer who writes for The Nation and also appears on MSNBC, referred to the Supreme Court as the extreme court, and that's really what they've become. Another headline from a recent commentary on this term is that the Supreme Court is turning the Constitution into a suicide pact, an instrument of obstruction, a formidable obstacle to solving most of the nation's most pressing problems. The court justices are, I think, right-wing zealots would be a fair characterization, who ignore precedent and reality itself, one other commentator said. And just my own 2 cents would be that I think their rulings are intellectually dishonest.
Yeah.
And it's just they've become partisan political hacks who ignore both the law and the facts. Okay, we've told you what we think about the Supreme Court. Let's turn now to, one other thing to throw in here is that I think the public is also beginning to turn against this court and see it as an illegitimate institution. Its approval rating has fallen down to 38%, with 61% disapproving. And this is from a Marquette Law School poll just recently. And let's go back to September in 2020, it had a 66% approval rate. So it's fallen almost 30 points in just a couple of short years. And these rulings, I think, have helped fuel the sense that this Supreme Court has become an illegitimate institution. Well, the biggest ruling, Regina, was Roe v. Wade. And so the right to a legal abortion has been overturned. It's no longer considered to be a constitutional right. So what's your take on this? There's lots of aspects to this, but kind of from your perspective, what do you think the major damage from overturning Roe v. Wade is?
Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm glad that you referenced, what the American public wants versus what the court is doing. And when you look at the polls, 2/3 will support abortion services and abortion rights and people's right to that. And so, of course, when you think about drilling down to women and how it impacts women, and particularly women of color, it's even more unbalanced about how this ruling represents what we believe and what we need. Mm-hmm. And so you start to think about then how do we get our voices heard when something like this happens? Mm-hmm. And that's the big issue. And we knew this was, was leaked in May, and people were already starting to think about what are the consequences of this. And then when it was finally, decided, people have been mobilizing. And that's one of the great things that we had some time to start to think about how do we respond to this to protect those rights. And you think about on what we can do through our legal system or through our not our judicial system, but in voting, right?
Right.
And so people have been out canvassing, trying to get things on the ballot to protect us. And so many states, this did have a devastating impact. And so when you think about Michigan, we did have these laws on here, but our governor right away said, no, we're not going to do that. And now we also have to get this on the ballot to make this part of the Constitution here. And so there are a lot of groundwork has been done. And I'm happy to say that we collected enough signatures to get, reproductive rights on the ballot, reproductive freedom for everybody on the ballot. And so now the big thing is to make sure that people come out to support this and getting people out to vote who really believe in this. And to do that, it'll take a lot of us speaking about this, that we can't be passive, because when we're not actively moving these things forward, it's not that we stand still, we go backwards. And that's what's been so devastating. When I was talking to people getting signatures, that's what people were saying. Like, we fought so hard for this 50 years ago. We really did. And how can we go backwards? We never thought that we would go backwards on this. And so that is the issue, but it's rooted in a lot. And so there are women who would say, this is about individual choice and my individual rights. And yes, that is. And when we talk about other populations, it's not just about that. It's about justice. It's about social justice, which we're all deeply committed to. And when you think about social justice and reproductive justice, this is about not only having the right for abortion service, for reproductive choices, but having access. And that's where it really impacts Black and brown women, because we can have this choice, but if we don't have health insurance, if we don't have medical people we can trust who we can go to when we need these services, we really aren't getting what we need. So the larger movement now is about reproductive justice, to make sure we all have access to what we need. And that is rooted, again, when we look at other issues that impact Black and brown people, economic justice, civil rights. It's all connected. So we all have to see how this one issue impacts all of us, and how can we all work together to change this system that oppresses certain people in our population. So it is that larger fight for social justice that all of us should be at the table questioning these decisions, and what it will mean to keep moving back and back and back. So that's what's really scary about all of this for a lot of us. And so, that's where we stand right now. Like, what's next?
What's next? Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I wish that the Supreme Court had as its first principle what the medical profession has: first, do no harm, because they didn't seem to care what were the implications of this for people. And I was struck, as I started to read more on this, by Sandra Day O'Connor's ruling in 2012 in the Casey case, where she said,
Which upheld Roe v. Wade.
which upheld Roe v. Wade, and she said, leave this alone now, because you have to look at the context we're in. There are great people on both sides of this issue, number one. Number two, we know that people are still going to continue to have abortions, only now it's going to be much more dangerous, and people will die because of this. We know that children, unloved children, are going to be born, and they're going to be out there, and what's going to happen to them? What does it mean to be an unloved child in this kind of a world? And the whole idea of, the fetus is life. But what about the life of the woman? What about the life of the kid? All that was not taken into account at all.
Right.
I think about the term arrogance of power. They had the power, and they did it arrogantly without any consideration of what this means to ordinary people.
The
And
impact
the
it was
point
gonna
that
have.
you made is so important now. Right.
Reproductive health care. I think that's an important phrase
Yes.
about talking about
Right.
this issue, because it involves a lot of different aspects of the health care of women and their families and their other children, and that was not taken into account. As a criminologist, I can state very emphatically that criminalizing abortion does nothing to reduce abortion. There's abundant evidence from around the world.
Right.
The most recent case is Ireland. Ireland
Right.
passed a very tough abortion law. It did nothing. It did not reduce abortions one whit, and they've taken it away now. They've gotten rid of that. It just does not work. If you truly are opposed to abortion, there are so many other ways in which you
Right.
could work to try to reduce the necessity for women to have to make that particular
Right.
choice. Most women who choose abortions probably don't see that as their first option or don't want that as their first option, but often because of their life circumstances, that becomes the best available option to them. But there are many other ways to reduce abortions that do not involve criminalizing the women who get an abortion or criminalizing the providers. And that's the route that this takes. And criminalization just doesn't work.
Exactly.
Right.
There are limits to the criminal sanction. Law professor Herbert Packer wrote a famous book back in the 60s on the limits to the criminal sanctions. And sometimes criminal sanctions are not the way to go, don't produce the results that you want. Even if you really, really, really are opposed to abortion, criminalizing is not going to get you the goal, if that is your professed goal. Now, we can question whether that's really the goal for,
Right.
for some of the people involved. I think, again, arrogance of power, exercising control over women,
Right.
and a more traditionalist conception of the family, a patriarchal structure of the
Exactly.
family. There are lots of other issues in there. But reducing abortion, if that was your goal, this is not going to do it.
No.
And that's,
Yeah.
Don, you were going to.
Well, I was just going to say that in Ireland, I think it's really interesting the effects of changing that law had on the health of women in Ireland. They can demonstrate how maternal deaths have gone down, and it's been much better for women through that law. Yeah.
The new law.
The new law.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about Roe? So there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot this November
Yes.
here in Michigan. Okay, so we
Exactly.
want people who are
Yeah,
concerned with reproductive health care rights should vote yes
Yes.
for this amendment, right? And it would go
Exactly,
into the
exactly.
Michigan Constitution.
Right, right. It's just making sure that people understand the far-reaching consequences of this, looking at it in context and telling
Yeah.
that story and how important it is to tell
Right.
that story.
Right.
Right.
All right. Now we can come back to any of these decisions, but let's move on to another one that had a big impact, and that was a decision by the court. Interestingly enough, let me just point out that what the court said in the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe, is that, well, this is a matter for the states to consider.
Right.
Right.
Let the states decide what's going to happen. But then right before that, in this case from New York State, which is New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, they struck down the Sullivan Law in New York. So here a state tried to take some action to reduce gun violence, and they said, no, we're not going to let you as an individual state make that choice. A little bit of hypocrisy there. And so what this ruling did is it struck down this law in the state of New York. And what New York said is that, okay, if you want to apply to get a concealed weapons permit, you have to show proper cause. And this has been a law that's been on the book for decades.
1897.
Long standing. And yet the court said no. The Second Amendment, as we interpret it, and I want to talk about that interpretation in just a minute, the Second Amendment, as we interpret it, doesn't allow you, the state of New York, to ask people to show proper cause. They have an unfettered right to access to own guns or to have a concealed weapons permit. So that was a dramatic. And so, I mean, given all the discussion about gun violence that we've had recently and all the horrific instances we've had, to say that a state can't take, and this is a pretty limited move, it doesn't say you can't get a concealed weapon permit, but if you get one, you need to show why you need it. You need to show some just cause, and yet that's been now struck down. It's just, to me, and so I guess let me finish my thought about the Second Amendment here. This is based on a radical reinterpretation of the Second Amendment. And that came about in another infamous Supreme Court decision in 2008, the Heller versus Washington, D.C. Heller, for the first time, so from 1791 until 2008, the United States Supreme Court had never struck down any type of government gun regulation. Never. Because it interpreted the Second Amendment properly, in my view, that it referred to state militias and the regulation of state militias. It did not confer an individual right for people to possess weapons. That was the radical reinterpretation of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was never intended to do that. It makes reference to a well-regulated militia, and of course the National Rifle Association and the advocates for the Second Amendment always leave that important controlling phrase out of their citing the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia. And of course the history is that this referred to state militias. When the battle between the states and the new federal government was going on, the idea was that the states wanted to preserve their right to still form state militias. And that's what the Second Amendment grants. Now, the reason for that was basically to create slave patrols,
Right.
right, and to use state militias for those kinds of nefarious purposes. But nonetheless, the Second Amendment itself is a reference to the creation of state militias, that states would be allowed. And the other phrase in the Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep, it's a collective right. It's clearly a collective right, both with the reference to a well-regulated militia and the right of the people. It doesn't say individuals. We, the people of the United States, create this Constitution, right? It's a
Right.
Right.
collective
Right.
endeavor. And that was the interpretation. For over 200 years, that was the interpretation of the Second Amendment, that it conferred a collective right upon the states to form state militias. Because they didn't want a standing federal army, they still felt that there would be need for state militias to be created for other kinds of purposes. So it was a collective right. But a long campaign by the right wing, by certain right-wing forces, the National Rifle Association and the gun industry, the gun corporations, tried to put out another interpretation, a second interpretation, a more radical interpretation. And by the way, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court back under Nixon, Warren Burger, who was a conservative Republican, not a radical leftist by any means, he referred to this reinterpretation of the Second Amendment as a fraud, one of the greatest pieces of fraud ever perpetuated. And so again, take that as an important indicator that this was a very radical reinterpretation that was being pushed. But it succeeded. Heller was decided. Anthony Scalia got it through. He wrote the opinion. And so 2008, Heller basically imposes this radical reinterpretation of the Second Amendment, that it allows for an unfettered, not an unfettered, it allows for individual possession of weapons. Now, it was not an unfettered right. Even if you read Justice Scalia, who was a brilliant man and very, very conservative, probably the most conservative member of the court at that time, but he said there still would be instances where it would be in the interest of the state to impose certain kinds of regulations. But the one in D.C., the D.C. law, which completely banned any possession of handguns in the city, was struck down. But there would be other instances where the state would have reason to impose some kind of regulation. But now, with Justice Thomas, that's completely out the window as well. Thomas seems to think that this is a completely unfettered right, that nothing can be done to limit a person's ability to get their hands on a gun or to get a concealed weapons permit. So this is a very dangerous decision, okay, I've gone on too long probably.
No, you're right. You're right. You did
Don,
right.
you want to add anything to that?
Well, I just want to say that even Donald Trump put regulations on guns. I mean, he outlawed bump stocks after Nevada, after the shooting in Nevada. So I don't believe that there are many people, many law experts in the country who believe that you can't regulate firearms. You can. And the whole history of the country, as you said, shows that we have done that. But this interpretation of the Supreme Court seems to go against all that. It seems to say, no, there can't be any regulations on this. And again, they ignore what's happening in the country. They ignore what is going on to people. And I just think we all know the problems. I mean, the city here, we experience the problems of gun violence in the city. I'm going to be at a meeting this afternoon at 4 o'clock to talk about this very thing. And we have to step in, or else innocent people are going to be killed and lives ruined for the people that do the shooting and the other person there. So, this kind of a ruling which ignores the precedent of all before is so harmful to the country. And again, just ignores the context in which we live.
Yeah. One of the dissenting justices pointed out the problem of gun violence and the fact that we have 45,000 deaths a year due to gun violence. And Alito was, that's you can't talk about that. That's irrelevant. Well, no, it's not. It's not irrelevant. It's the reality that we face. And the fact is that we are going to have governmental restrictions on guns if we're going to get a handle on this problem. And that this ruling seems to lead us in the completely wrong direction. But even Gorsuch, in his concurring opinion, he agreed with the overall ruling, but he kind of sort of goes at Clarence Thomas and says, "You've gone a little too far here. You're this unfettered right, this complete. We still can have some regulations, just not this one," is what he's saying.
So I just wanted to say, in both these cases, the ignoring of the international context, how other countries proceed, that we know better than all these other countries. It's so striking. It's so damning.
Yeah. And so in one case, they're saying that let's return this issue to the states, right? The states know best.
Right.
And yet that flies in the face of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was created after the Civil War to say, no, states can't deny rights that are fundamental rights. And they enumerated what those fundamental rights were, not in specific language, but in a more abstract way. So if we look at the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment are extremely important. Probably the most important constitutional principles that we have.
Yeah.
Both of these came after the end of the Civil War and the battle over slavery and states' rights and such. And the decision at that time to pass the 14th Amendment was basically to say, no, individual states can't deny people due process of law.
Right.
They can't create laws that deny the equal protection of the law to all citizens. Now, of course, this was in the context of the freed slaves, right?
Right.
They were creating black codes and other forms of control to reassert control at that time. And the federal government stepped in and said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. These are fundamental rights that are accorded to all American citizens, and we won't allow states to take those away. Now, in the other case, the Sullivan case in New York, the state took a stand and the Supreme Court jumped in and said, no, you can't do that. But the right that they were talking about was a completely made up right?
Right.
There was nothing in the 200-year history of the country at that time or legal precedent that said, there's an unfettered right to possess guns. So again, the fact is that they're willing to say states can make decisions that might infringe upon people's rights that are well established, and yet states can't infringe upon a right that's been totally a bogus right that's been created only in the last 50 years by a particular kind of social movement. Okay. Anything else on guns? I rattled on way too long on that, sorry.
No. That's such an important one.
Yeah,
I mean,
to look at it from
being a criminologist, that gets into my bailiwick, I guess.
good.
Let's talk about another really important decision that came about here, and that was the West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency. And this is a decision that is going to restrict the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to regulate dirty energy without explicit congressional approval or explicit congressional instruction. What do you make of this one?
Well, we know that the chances of getting explicit instruction from this
From this
Congress
Congress.
is non-existent.
Right,
So that's not
right.
going to happen. So in the context, again, of a climate crisis, we're saying, no, you really can't regulate this terrible harm
Right.
that is being foisted on the people. Yes, it makes no sense at all. It's just, and the language in the Clean Air Act is pretty explicit,
Right.
saying that the Environmental Protection Agency has the right to impose the best solutions to preventing this pollution. It's in the wording of the law. So I don't understand how they could even stretch beyond that. It makes no sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense at all. And so I referenced that one quote that the Supreme Court is turning the Constitution into a suicide pact because it's preventing us from dealing with important problems, whether it's reproductive health rights, whether
Right.
it's gun violence, and now in this case we have the climate crisis. And it's more far-reaching than just the climate crisis, of course. I mean, that's the basis for this particular ruling, right? Because, and it's really weird because, you know, the Obama administration had proposed
Right.
a Clean Air Act, right? Or a clean power plan. And at that time, some states sued and said, you know, this is, and so the Supreme Court put it on hold at the moment until they could rule on it. Well, it was never implemented, right? And then the Trump administration came in and basically said, we're going to take away the Clean Power Plan anyhow.
Right.
So it had never been enforced.
Right.
So it wasn't an operation. And yet, despite that, the court still said, we're still going to take this case.
Yeah.
And we're going to make a ruling that's going to have far-reaching implications. Because, again, as right-wing zealots, they are concerned with limiting the power of the federal government and enhancing the power of corporate actors.
Right.
And that's what this does, right? Because it basically says, look, the federal government's ability to regulate corporations is going to be severely curtailed, right?
Yeah.
Unless the Congress very explicitly spells out exactly what is supposed to happen, which it never does, right? I mean, and
Right.
the Congress is not in a position to do this,
no,
right?
they don't.
So we're concerned about clean power. We're concerned about clean air. We're concerned about limiting emissions. And we don't know exactly the best way to do that,
No.
but we've created an agency, right? We've set up the
Exactly.
Environmental
Experts.
Protection Agency. That's their concern. They have expertise. They're the ones now who we're granting the power to create law, to create regulations. We don't know what the best thing to do is. We're, you know, up here in Congress. That's not our day-to-day concern. Your day-to-day concern at the Environmental Protection Agency is to deal with these things.
Right.
And now the Supreme Court is basically saying, no, no, no. The EPA, despite its expertise, despite the fact that it's day-to-day working with these things, can't do anything unless the Congress tells them exactly what they're supposed to do. And that's just not the way federal regulation has ever worked, and it's a completely unworkable model, right?
Right.
It can't. So this basically means that almost any kind of regulatory law could be gutted by the Supreme Court if they follow the precedent they've now established here. And they out of completely thin air created a new concept of major questions, a new doctrine, major questions doctrine. Well, what the heck is that? Well, if a ruling by a regulatory agency is going to have a major political or economic impact, it raises a major question, and only Congress can address major questions. Well, I mean, that's
Where'd
just,
that come from?
yeah, that's just fictional. You know, obviously all regulation is going to have some economic impact.
Yeah.
It grows out of a political process. These major questions are embedded in the whole process of creating regulation. And so this is another ruling that basically, now is going to tie the hands of the federal regulatory system to deal with anything, let alone the climate crisis. So it's just another disastrous decision.
I think the point you make about expertise is really important. It's impossible for Congress to be an expert on all the issues that come before them. There's so
Right.
many. They rely on people that have studied and are doing the research and and have the expertise in that. That's the only way that this whole thing could function. And to think that Congress would have the ability in all the issues that they take up to make rulings on this without handing it over to people that do have the expertise just makes no sense at all.
Yeah. I mean, what's the role of the EPA? If the Congress has to give them an actual blueprint about what to
Right.
do, then
Right.
what the heck do you need an EPA for?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
All right, should we talk about the separation of church and state? Regina, you want to take this one on? We had another ruling from the court. So we've talked about, so far we've had the overturning of reproductive health rights. We've had striking down on the ability of a state to deal with gun violence, and we've had the striking down of the ability of the federal regulatory system to deal with carbon emissions. Now we get a ruling that seems to erode the separation of church and state.
Yes, exactly. So we have a case here where a football coach was praying and openly on the football field after the games. And then we had a lot of chaos starting because there were people coming out and doing it as well. And that does question the church and state separation. Is this allowed on the school grounds? And the implications of somebody in a authority figure, it has an impact on their students and them following them. And so that was being jeopardized. And so unfortunately, they did not see it that way, not our Supreme Court. And they said that this person had the right to do that, and not to do it off in private, but to do it in public like that. And so it was once again that situation that we talked about, that they were using a narrative or a story about how it was portrayed that was incorrect to make this decision, and that's what's problematic when they make decisions based on something that's incorrect.
They don't let the facts or the
Exactly.
laws get in their way
Exactly.
of their right-wing agenda, basically.
Right.
And this is interesting because the First Amendment, so there's sort of two aspects in the First Amendment toward religion, right? On the one hand, it allows for the free expression of religion. So the state can't deny you the ability to practice your religion.
Exactly.
Right? And that's where the court is going on this one. They're seeing this as free expression. But there's also the Establishment Clause that basically says the state can't establish a religion, right? And here we have a public official, right? A school, a teacher, a coach who works for a public school system as a state official who's now leading prayer. And that is prohibited by the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. This is not him with the free expression of his own individual religious view. If that were the case, he could go hide in the locker room and pray after the game, right?
Exactly.
But he's very publicly going out to the 50-yard line after the game. And it forces the students, it puts them in a very uncomfortable position. Do we support our coach and go pray with him? And of course, there are many students with enthusiastically with doing that. But it pressured other students. Well, I don't really want to do this, but I better do it if I want to stay in the good graces of the coach and all my peers who are going out there. So it puts a lot of pressure on young people to conform to something they may not agree with, right?
Exactly.
They may be Jewish.
Right,
They may be
exactly.
Muslim. They may be nuns, right?
Right.
Atheist or agnostic. But now they're being compelled, in a sense, by pressure, by peer pressure and public pressure to engage in religious activity. And that's what the Constitution tries to prohibit, right? That's what Jefferson meant by having that wall of separation between church and state. And clearly this violates that separation between the church and state, because this is a state official leading prayer, establishing religion. So that's very concerning, I think, that this is a sort of an erosion of a very fundamental principle.
And I believe that some of the players said that they felt that they had to do this. I mean, he's got all power over them. He decides if they play or not.
Exactly.
And when he's out there praying and the other guys are going out there, if I'm a player and I want to play, I'm going to be out there too, right?
Exactly, supporting
so
my
the
coach.
pressure that goes on, it's a stretch to say that he was just exercising his right to exercise his religious beliefs. No,
Exactly.
doesn't fit.
And I don't remember which justice wrote the opinion, but they mischaracterized the situation
Exactly.
Yes, they
entirely.
did.
As if he's sneaking off on the sidelines in the shadows to offer a prayer, and nobody could feel. No, he was going right on the 50-yard
50-yard
line.
line.
Exactly.
So they completely mischaracterized the facts of the case, in addition
Yeah.
to getting the law
Yeah.
completely wrong. Again, just what a disastrous term for this court, and yet, I think we maybe need to pause a little bit and try to figure out how the heck did we get here, right?
But before you do that, Ron, what's scary to me, all this is scary to me, they've agreed to take up a case in the fall on voting rights. And given the precedent where we are here now, I'm frightened about what this court is going to rule on voting rights. Tremendously frightened on it.
And they have other things in their scope, don't they, Regina?
Yes, so we've heard LGBTQ rights,
Oh, right.
gay marriage, because all of those things aren't explicitly stated in the Constitution. So
Right.
here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, affirmative action. And some want to overturn the gay marriage decision from 2015. It's just it's amazing. And Thomas seems to be the one that's really sort of out there leading the charge. He and Alito seem to be the two that seem to be really out there leading the
No
charge
question.
to take up these other issues. Now, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch in particular, I don't know if Amy Coney Barrett has made any public statement about this, but they seem to say, no, this is, Roe, we overturned Roe, but that's as far as we're going to go. But clearly, Thomas and Alito want to go further.
Absolutely.
And Amy Coney Barrett may want to also, given her background and her religious convictions as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So there's still many things out there on the horizon that are, we see danger signs, don't we? So that's why this is really important, that we figure out what can we do, right?
Yes.
As you mentioned with the constitutional amendment, that's one response to Roe, that we can, the overturning of Roe, that we can undertake as citizens in our state to put it into our state constitution, right?
Exactly. So
yeah.
that's why these midterm elections are going to be key to see how we make sure who has the power at the governor's level, at the legislature level as well, because that's going to impact what happens at
Right.
the state level.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And of course, there's been some discussion about changing the number of people who sit on the court, right?
Yeah.
It's at 9. The Constitution doesn't specify
Right.
the number of justices on the Supreme Court. 9 is where it ended up. It's been different over the
Yeah.
course of time. It ended up at 9. There's nothing magical about 9. And of course, everybody keeps going back to the reference about packing the court.
Yeah.
That was the charge leveled against Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was concerned that the Supreme Court of his day, a very conservative court, was striking down critical aspects of the New Deal, in which he felt were, again, rulings that ignored the facts and the law at that time. And so there was some talk about expanding the court, which then his opponents characterized as packing the court. And so that term just keeps coming up every time you talk about, well, is 9 really the number? Could it be 11? Could we add some justices and allow the current president to appoint some people? That packing the court issue comes up.
Yeah, I was surprised in my reading that there were times when 9 weren't on the court, when they had less, and I think they had 11 at one time, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I think they had 7 and then 11 at one time too.
And in more recent history, we had only 8.
Oh, that's right. That's
So
right.
let's-
In the
if
Obama
people-
term.
If people don't remember, during when Scalia, Anthony Scalia died, there was an opening on the court. The President of the United States was Barack Obama. He had every right under the Constitution to appoint a Supreme
right.
Court justice and submit it to the Senate for confirmation. But Mitch McConnell basically said, no, I'm going to deny you that right. This is completely unethical. It's completely unconstitutional in my view. But what McConnell was saying, and he's such a two-faced hypocrite. He says,
Right.
in this instance, okay, well, there's going to be an election next year, so let's let the people decide. Let's let, who do they decide is going to be well, Barack Obama has over a year left in his term. He is the President of the United States until the end of his term. And so he has the right, the authority to do it. But McConnell says, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. And so Merrick Garland was recommended for the post, and McConnell refused to take up. So I think that was a completely unethical and unconstitutional act on his part. So the court limped along with only 8 members until then, of course, then the Donald Trump disaster occurred, the selection of Donald Trump through the undemocratic Electoral College. Didn't win the popular vote. And so then now Trump gets the right to appoint, he ends up getting a chance to appoint 3. Right. And let's remember that the third one was to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away very, very late in Trump's term.
Right.
Very, very late in 2020 when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And McConnell rushed to fill that. Everybody, wait a minute, Mitch. Didn't you say that in an election year you can't allow the president to let the next president decide? Oh, no, Mitch McConnell, hypocrisy is my name. I'm going to ram this through. And I ran.
Right.
Record speed.
Right.
They rammed it through to get Amy Coney Barrett on the court because that gave them now a 6-person majority, conservative majority on the court.
Yeah.
So it's that utter hypocrisy of Mitch McConnell to say one thing, oh, we can't allow President Obama to do this because the next year is going to be an election year, and yet in an election season to allow and push and ram through a selection just shows his level of ethics.
Yeah.
And then of course, the undemocratic filibuster rule in the Senate is also, they got rid of that with regard to Supreme Court decisions, but in other decisions they won't do it, so more hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And again, Trump had the chance to appoint 3 justices.
Amazing.
Wow.
It's just, there's lots, one can fairly characterize the Trump presidency as a disaster on many fronts, but this may be the most disastrous aspect of the Trump presidency, that he had a chance to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court. And again, he didn't win the popular vote. And other members, George W. Bush did not win the popular vote either. And he got a chance to select some justices. So many of the justices on the court were picked by presidents who did not win the popular vote. And so we're really stuck. So what do you make of Mitch McConnell there, Tom?
Yeah, I'm glad I wish I had a chance to vote against him. But the question I have is, where do we go from here? I mean, you're talking about state, and that's so important. That's so important. But I see these people in the Supreme Court trying to overrule the states, put through a national ban on abortion, for example, or on some of these other things. So I think we're in a tough spot. And unless, certainly elections are more important than they ever were because of this whole thing. But I'm wondering what else is possible here? I don't know. There's talk of revamping the Constitution because as you're talking about, Ron, the whole idea of somebody being president and not getting the majority of the people voting for that person, that's unfair. The whole Electoral College thing doesn't work.
Right.
The people that get the most votes should win.
Yeah.
What a
Yes.
concept.
I know.
What a concept. The people that get the most
I
votes
know.
should win the election. But it doesn't work that way
No.
in the United States. The Electoral College is just such an undemocratic institution, and we really need to do something about it. But it's, again, given the current composition of the Congress, it's unlikely that we're going to see any action on that. The Republican Party, which is a minority party, it benefits from the Electoral College because it allows them, despite not getting the majority of the votes in an election, to still win
Right.
the presidency. And that's just, you know,
And it's also plays out in representation in Congress, how the congressional districts are set up in such a way that there are very few congressional districts in the United States where the outcome isn't predetermined. How could you a Democrat win a seat in Congress in the district in which we live? It's almost impossible the way that whole thing is set up. That's not right. That's just not right.
Exactly.
gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Is the term the political scientists use to characterize this. And of course, if the party in power has the ability to draw the districts, then they can engage in this practice of gerrymandering and rig up the districts so that they have a majority. Now in Michigan, we've taken a step to try to eliminate that, right? We've gotten rid of the idea that the majority party can set up the districts. We have an independent commission that was created, again, through another ballot initiative,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
The importance of these ballot initiatives, Regina, right? The one coming up and
Right.
this one from a couple of years ago, very important. And so we have a different system in Michigan that will, as we move forward, will hopefully address
I hope
some of
so.
those concerns.
I don't think it did very well this time. I
Yeah.
don't think it did.
Yeah, I don't think it came out with the fairest results,
No.
but yeah, we need to move in that
Yeah,
direction.
it's the right direction to move in. No question about that. Yeah.
But Regina, your point about the elections being so important, I mean, you know, it's likely, according to current polling, that the Republicans are going to recapture the House of Representatives. And we don't know about the Senate. There's some possibility that they could even capture the Senate. And that would be the death knell for a lot of the kinds of legislation that's currently being proposed by the Biden administration to help the American people deal with COVID and to deal with you know, inflation and to deal with all the other problems that we face. So
Yes, exactly. And as we were discussing, I mean, right now Biden is sort of getting some momentum to get some important things
Yeah.
passed that hopefully that people can see that moving in this direction is the way we want to go, and that will impact midterm elections in a positive way. So that is a little ray of hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, that these, just over the last week,
Yes.
couple of things came through that were very important to move us in the right direction.
Exactly. Because, people are starting to get disaffected, you know, like what difference does
Right.
it make
Yeah.
when we have rulings like this? But I think this will help us tell a different story, that it does make a difference, that you do
Absolutely.
need to go out and vote. Yeah.
do you think Roe will motivate people to vote, to get out there who are concerned about the curtailing of reproductive rights? Do you think that's going to motivate people to get out there and vote more?
I do. At least what I'm hearing, that people can see, sometimes they think things are so removed that it doesn't impact me, but now when, you know, everybody's speaking out about this and how it can impact you, you need to do something. So I do.
Okay. That would be the one thing that
Yeah.
you would hope, that some of the things that have happened at the national level show people the importance of getting out there and voting, and that clearly would be one of those areas that we hope that would motivate people to participate in the political process.
Exactly. It's important.
And I think the climate bill
Yes.
that just was agreed to this week, I mean, I think that will motivate people and say, yeah, we can do something here. That's really important. So I think that's going to make a difference.
David Wallace Wells writes a lot about the climate issue and now has a new newsletter on the New York Times website about the climate crisis. And his most recent, he was talking about the proposed legislation that Joe Manchin has now agreed to. What's it going to be called? The Fight Inflation Act or something like that. But what was the title before? It was some other.
The Build Back
Back
Better.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be called that anymore. Now it's going to be called the Fighting Inflation Act. And of course, Schumer and Manchin, we don't know exactly what went on in those negotiations, but apparently Manchin extracted something
Oh, yeah, you got it.
from that, so he's now agreeing to do that. But what David Wallace Wells was pointing out is, think about how far we've come. I mean, this legislation, if it passes, would be sort of amazing considering where we were just a few short years
That's
ago.
right.
And to think about how the politics of the climate issue have changed so dramatically. I mean, a few short years ago, we didn't even know anything about Greta Thunberg,
Yeah.
the young
Yeah.
woman from Sweden, and her lonely little strike, climate strike, and look at what a major impact she's had now,
Right.
helping to galvanize and mobilize a movement, and the change in public opinion. And he was citing a number of indicators, the creation of the group Sunrise as a strong lobbying force to deal with the climate issue. And he's saying, really, if you think about it and put it in a kind of a larger context, in a very short period of time, the politics of the climate have changed dramatically.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to him, this is a very good sign that this kind of legislation is not perfect. It's not exactly what we need to deal with the issue, but
Right.
nonetheless, this is represents a major victory, a major advance.
Probably the major legislation that Congress has ever passed. I think the weather has a lot to do with it too.
I think so too.
People are seeing it. They're saying, wow.
Wow. Yes. Yeah.
Look at all the heat waves. Look at the drought. Look at the flood.
Floods,
Yeah, right,
Kentucky
right.
right
St.
now.
Louis and Kentucky, my
Oh,
God, those
goodness.
are horrible.
Yeah.
And the wildfires out west and the drought and, the lakes out there, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, dropping to extremely low levels, and people keep flocking to Phoenix and they keep flocking to San Antonio, and there isn't enough water out there,
I
and
know.
they're heading out there. And so, we really need to do more on the climate issue, but at least this is an important step forward. So.
But I have to say one thing. It's my time. Yeah. A friend of mine was an emergency manager in a small city. And he was at a meeting of emergency managers for the state. And the man who was speaking at that said, look, what you're seeing now with this climate stuff, this is just the beginning. It's going to get worse. A third of the people got up and walked out. A third of the emergency managers got up and
Oh,
walked
my
out.
God.
What climate change you're talking at? I don't believe it.
Really?
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
And that happened a month ago.
People who are supposed to be in a position of
I
dealing
know,
with
I know.
these things. Wow, that's very disheartening, to say the least.
Makes us want to work harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Regina, we're just about out of time, but one more pitch for the ballot proposal.
So yes, like I said, it's really important that we make sure that their choice is there, and that these services are available to everyone. But at the same time, at a different level, we also have more work to do around justice issues, and making sure that healthcare, safe choices are available to everybody in the community. And there are some organizations that are working on that, and to know that we fall short, and reaching out to the people who need support and making these reproductive choices. And so that's another place where we can lend our voices to make sure when we're looking at budgets, where does our money go to support the people who really need more access to health care? So yes, so when you're listening to people and what they stand for, make sure that you're considering all of these issues.
And look for this ballot proposal.
Exactly, and look for the ballot proposal
support.
up in November to support it, yes.
Do we know what it's going to be called yet, or?
I think so far it's been the reproductive freedom.
Okay, okay, reproductive
Yeah.
freedom. All right. Well, to close today, I just want to point out to folks that we've got another major anniversary coming up in our community. The Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War is going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary, coming up very shortly. 20 years ago, right now, we knew that the George W. Bush administration was preparing to invade Iraq. It was very obvious to a lot of people at that time. You and I had a phone conversation that summer and say we need to do something about this. And so there were a number of strands that kind of came together. Tom Small and his wife Nancy, his late wife Nancy. Nancy said for her birthday that September, she wanted to stand in front of the federal building with a sign saying no war. And so they did that with one other friend, and then it grew from there. More and more people joined every Sunday. You and I went to a meeting at the Friends that commemorate the first anniversary of 9/11, and we announced that we were going to hold a meeting, and about 20 people came, and Joe Gump, bless his heart, the late Joe Gump was the one who proposed our name, Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War. Everybody agreed that that nicely captured what we were about. We opposed war, and we did so nonviolently. And so at that point, then we started to organize. And I don't know if people remember, but one of the things that we did that fall then was to create these blue signs, Another Family for Peace. So anyway, the 20th anniversary is coming up. We're going to have some kind of a celebration to celebrate KNOW, so look for that. And we thank you for joining us on Critical Issues Alternative Views. We hope you come back again. Thank you. Thanks to Regina. Thanks to Don. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.